February 19th, 1943. 130 meters below the surface of the North Atlantic, Kapitänleutnant Werner Hartmann presses his ear against the cold steel bulkhead of U-264. The hydrophone operator sits frozen at his station, headphones clamped tight, eyes closed in concentration. Then it comes. A sharp metallic ping that reverberates through the pressure hull like a hammer striking an empty oil drum. Ping. Another one. Closer this time. The sound travels through water at nearly 1,500 meters per second, hitting the submarine's hull and bouncing back to the British destroyer somewhere above. Hartmann doesn't need to check his watch. He already knows. In approximately 90 seconds, depth charges will start falling through the darkness above them. 90 seconds until 450 kilograms of Torpex explosive descend through the black water, hunting for his boat, his crew, his life. This is the mathematics of terror that German U-boat commanders learned to calculate with brutal precision by 1943. Not the mathematics of torpedo angles or fuel consumption, but the cold arithmetic of survival measured in heartbeats and seconds. How long from detection to death? How many pings before the charges fall? How deep can you dive before the steel cylinder you're trapped inside becomes your coffin? The answer, it turns out, is written in the physics of underwater sound and the sinking rate of explosives. And understanding that answer means understanding how the Battle of the Atlantic transformed from a hunting ground for German submariners into a gauntlet of psychological torture where every ping meant a countdown clock had started, ticking. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The technology that terrified Werner Hartmann and thousands of U-boat commanders like him didn't emerge overnight. It evolved through decades of research that began, ironically, with an iceberg. April 15th, 1912. The RMS Titanic strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinks, killing over 1,500 people. Within months, inventors on both sides of the Atlantic proposed the same solution. Use underwater sound waves to detect obstacles ahead of ships before collision. The idea is elegant. Sound travels efficiently through water, roughly 4 times faster than through air. If you can generate a pulse of sound and measure how long the echo takes to return, you can calculate the distance to whatever reflected it. British and French researchers working separately during World War I refined this concept into what the British call Asdic, the Anti-Submarine Detection Investigation Committee device, though that acronym is actually invented after the fact to maintain secrecy. The Americans call it sonar. The first operational ASD sets reach Royal Navy destroyers in 1928. They're crude devices. A quartz crystal transducer mounted in a dome beneath the ship's keel sends out pulses of sound at frequencies between 14 and 22 kHz, well above human hearing range. When the pulse strikes a submerged object, some of the energy reflects back. An operator wearing headphones listens for these echoes, measuring the time delay to determine range. In 1940, a skilled Asdic operator can detect a submarine at ranges up to 2,000 meters, just over 1 nautical mile. That's theoretical maximum. In practice, ocean conditions, water temperature layers, the skill of the operator, and sheer luck determine actual detection range. But even 1 mile represents a revolution. Before Asdic, detecting a submerged submarine meant spotting a periscope wake with the naked eye, a nearly impossible task in the vast Atlantic. The Germans know the British have developed underwater detection equipment. Kriegsmarine intelligence. Reports mention it as early as 1937. But the reports contain a fatal misunderstanding of how effective the technology has become by the time war breaks out in September of 1939. German submariners are taught that Allied detection equipment is unreliable, easily confused by ocean conditions, and has limited range. They're told that maintaining proper depth and speed makes detection unlikely. This is partially true in 1939 and 1940. Early war Asdic sets are temperamental. They produce false echoes from schools of fish, thermal layers, ship wakes, even whales. Operators need months of training to distinguish a genuine submarine contact from oceanic noise. The equipment can't determine depth accurately. It loses contact when the range closes below 200 meters because the sound beam passes over or under the submarine. And it's completely blind to submarines operating on the surface, which is where U-boats spend most of their time in the early war years, attacking convoys at night when visual detection is nearly impossible. But by 1942, incremental improvements in both technology and tactics begin shifting the balance. Operators gain experience. New signal processing techniques help filter out false contacts. More importantly, Allied scientists and naval officers start understanding not just how Asdic works, but how to use it as part of a coordinated system involving multiple escorts, aircraft, radio direction finding, and crucially, depth charges that have been refined into far more effective weapons. The depth charge itself predates Asdic. Developed during World War I, it's conceptually simple, a cylindrical canister packed with explosive, usually 200 to 300 kilograms of TNT or the more powerful explosive Torpex, fitted with a hydrostatic fuse that detonates at a preset depth. Destroyers and corvettes drop these charges off their sterns as they pass over a suspected submarine position, or launch them to either side using special throwers called K-guns or Y-guns. The physics of underwater explosions make depth charges devastating when they detonate close enough. Water is nearly incompressible, so the shock wave from an explosion travels farther and hits harder than in air. A 600-pound depth charge detonating within 15 feet of a submarine's pressure hull will crack steel plates, rupture welds, and flood compartments. The explosion creates not just a primary shock wave, but secondary shock waves, as the gas bubble expands and contracts up to 16 times, each cycle bending the submarine's hull back and forth like flexing a plastic ruler until it snaps. But here's the problem from the attacker's perspective. Getting a depth charge within 15 feet of a maneuvering submarine that you can't see is extraordinarily difficult. The submarine is moving, the depth charge is sinking, the escort ship is moving. All of these factors must be calculated correctly, and the calculation must account for what submariners call the blind time. The blind time is the period between when the escort loses Asdic contact with the submarine and when the depth charges actually explode at depth. This is when the submarine can take evasive action that the escort cannot observe or counter. Understanding blind time requires understanding the sequence of events in a depth charge attack, which by 1943 has become a standardized procedure that U-boat commanders learn to dread with intimate familiarity. Step 1. Detection. The escort's Asdic operator sweeps his sound beam in an arc, stopping every few degrees to transmit a ping and listen for echoes. When he detects a contact that might be a submarine, he reports bearing and estimated range to the bridge. Let's say the submarine is at a range of 1,500 meters, roughly 800 yards. Step 2. Closing. The escort turns toward the contact and increases speed to approximately 15 knots. The Asdic operator continues pinging, refining his estimate of the submarine's depth based on how the contact behaves. If the submarine is deep, the ASDIC will lose contact at longer range because the sound beam passes over the target. If shallow, contact holds until the escort is much closer. The operator also tries to determine if the contact is moving and in which direction, which requires multiple pings over time to establish a movement plot. This closing phase might take 5 to 7 minutes for a contact first detected at 1,500 meters. During this time, if the submarine's hydrophone operators are competent, they will hear the Asdic pings. This is the first indication that death might be approaching. The ping sound, as U-boat veterans describe it, resembles a handful of dried peas dropping into a tin can, a sharp, brittle noise that penetrates the hull and echoes through the boat. Early in the attack, the pings arrive at irregular intervals, separated by perhaps 20 or 30 seconds as the escort sweeps its sound beam across different areas. But as the range closes, the pings come faster and more regularly. The destroyer has locked onto your position and is tracking you. Step 3. Final approach. At approximately 1,000 yards, the escort commander makes his final calculations. He needs to estimate where the submarine will be, not when he arrives overhead, but when the depth charges reach the submarine's depth. This requires knowing or guessing the submarine's depth, speed, and heading. He adjusts his ship's course to account for the submarine's predicted movement, selecting what's called a lead angle, aiming ahead of where the target is now to where it will be. At 500 yards, contact typically becomes solid and continuous. The Asdic operator is pinging constantly now, perhaps every 5 to 10 seconds, each ping providing updated range and bearing. Inside the submarine, the crew can hear these pings accelerating in frequency. The psychological effect is crushing. You know the destroyer is closing. You know approximately how far away it is based on the time between pings. And you know that once those pings stop, it means the destroyer is directly overhead and the charges are about to fall. Step 4. Loss of contact. At approximately 300 yards, maybe closer if the submarine is shallow, the ASD contact is lost. The submarine passes into the blind zone directly beneath the destroyer, where the sound beam cannot reach. The operator reports contact lost to the bridge. From this moment until the depth charges explode, the escort is effectively firing blind, relying entirely on the commander's calculations of where the submarine should be. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Inside U-264, Werner Hartmann experiences what every U-boat commander learns to recognize. The pings stop, not gradually, but suddenly. One moment, the destroyer is tracking you. The next, there's silence. This silence doesn't mean the danger has passed. It means the danger is immediate. The destroyer is directly overhead, moving at 15 knots, and the depth charge crews are rolling charges off the stern racks and firing K-guns to launch charges to either side. The charges hit the water with impacts that the submarine's hydrophones can sometimes detect. Muffled thumps, like distant hammers striking wood. If you're very unlucky, you hear the charges hitting the water in a pattern, one after another, which tells you the destroyer is dropping a full pattern of 8 or 10 charges. Each charge weighs between 200 and 400 kilograms, depending on the model, and they begin sinking the moment they enter the water. Early war depth charges sink at approximately 2 to 3 meters per second, roughly 6 to 10 feet per second. By 1943, improved designs with more streamlined casings and heavier ballast sink faster, between 4 and 7 meters per second, or 15 to 22 feet per second. The charges are set to detonate at specific depths using hydrostatic fuses that trigger when water pressure reaches the preset level. Common settings are 50 meters, 100 meters, 150 meters, or 200 meters. Now the mathematics becomes brutally personal. If you're at 130 meters depth, and the depth charges are set for 150 meters, sinking at 5 meters per second, you have 30 seconds from the moment they enter the water until they detonate. 30 seconds during which you can attempt evasive maneuvers. You can increase speed, but your battery is already depleted from hours of submerged running. You can change depth, but diving deeper means risking hull collapse beyond your rated depth, and surfacing puts you directly in the teeth of the destroyer's guns. You can turn, but a submarine turns slowly, and the destroyer commander has calculated a lead angle that accounts for probable evasive maneuvers. The truth is, once the charges are in the water, your options are limited and mostly futile. This is why the psychological impact of Asdic is so devastating. The pings tell you exactly when the attack is coming, but knowing doesn't help because you cannot escape once the destroyer is within attack range. You're trapped in a steel tube, listening to the countdown to your possible death, and there's almost nothing you can do except wait and hope the destroyer commander's calculations are wrong. The wait feels eternal. Seconds stretch like hours. The control room is silent, except for the hum of electric motors and the shallow breathing of men trying not to make any sound that might help the enemy's hydrophones. Then, the first explosion arrives. The shock wave hits before the sound. That's what U-boat veterans remember most, vividly. The pressure hull flexes inward, just slightly, just enough to feel through your boots and hands. Then the sound arrives, a deep, bone-shaking wham that seems to come from everywhere at once. Light bulbs shatter, dust and rust flakes rain from overhead pipes. Men grab for handholds instinctively, though there's nothing to hold against if the hull ruptures. That first explosion tells you several critical things simultaneously. It tells you the depth charge was set too shallow or too deep, because if it had been set correctly, you wouldn't be alive to hear it. It tells you where the destroyer thinks you are, which might not be where you actually are. And most importantly, it tells you that more charges are coming, because destroyers never drop just one. The standard British depth charge attack pattern in 1943 consists of 10 charges. 2 rolled from stern racks in quick succession, 4 launched from K-guns to port and starboard at 40-yard intervals, 2 more from stern racks, and 2 final K-gun charges. The entire pattern is laid in approximately 15 seconds as the destroyer passes over the target position at speed, but the charges don't all detonate simultaneously. They're set for different depths, creating a 3-dimensional pattern designed to bracket the submarine vertically and horizontally. If the submarine is at 130 meters, the pattern might include charges set for 100 meters, 125 meters, 150 meters, and 175 meters. The charges set for 100 meters detonate first, roughly 20 seconds after entering the water at 5 meters per second sinking rate. Then the charges set for 125 meters, 5 seconds later. The pattern continues, creating a sustained barrage that lasts anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds depending on the depths involved. Werner Hartmann experiences this barrage as a series of hammer blows against the hull, each one closer or farther depending on the destroyer's accuracy. The first explosion is distant, perhaps 100 meters away. The pressure wave rocks the boat slightly, but causes no damage. The second is closer, maybe 50 meters. The lights flicker, a pressure gauge cracks. The third explosion is close enough that the secondary shock wave becomes evident. The hull flexes in and out rhythmically as the gas bubble from the explosion expands and contracts. This is the moment when submarines suffer catastrophic damage. The steel can only flex so many times before welds crack, plates buckle, and seawater begins forcing its way in through openings measured in millimeters that rapidly become centimeters. The acoustic environment inside the submarine during a depth charge attack is overwhelming. The explosions themselves are loud enough to cause temporary hearing loss. But between explosions, the hydrophone operator reports other sounds. The destroyer's propellers, a rhythmic thrashing that indicates the escort is circling back for another attack run. Breaking up noises, which might be the submarine's own hull groaning under stress, or might be debris from previous attacks sinking past them. And sometimes, most terrifying of all, the sound of more depth charges entering the water. The attack isn't over. It's just beginning. British escort doctrine by 1943 emphasizes sustained attacks. Don't drop one pattern and assume success. Drop patterns continuously until you achieve a confirmed kill, indicated by debris, oil, or wreckage surfacing, or until you're forced to break off because the convoy you're protecting has moved beyond support range. Some U-boats survive 300 depth charges over periods of 12 or 16 hours. U-427 survived 678 depth charges in April 1945, though by that point the boat was so damaged it could barely maneuver. The strategy behind this sustained attack doctrine is simple. Each pattern has perhaps a 4 to 6% chance of sinking the submarine outright with a direct hit, but each pattern also has a 30 to 40% chance of causing some damage. Crack a pressure hull plate, spring a leak, damage a motor, break a depth gauge. These injuries accumulate. The first attack damages the submarine slightly. The second attack makes the damage worse. The third attack exploits damage from previous attacks. By the 8th or 10th attack, the submarine is leaking in multiple compartments, running on depleted batteries, unable to dive safely because depth gauges are broken, and the crew is exhausted and terrified. This is when submarines make fatal mistakes. A commander decides to surface and surrender because continued diving is impossible. A crew panics and blows ballast tanks prematurely, sending the boat rocketing to the surface directly in front of the destroyer. A damaged motor catches fire, filling the boat with toxic smoke and forcing an immediate surfacing. The depth charges don't need to sink the submarine directly. They just need to damage it enough that the submarine sinks itself or is forced to surface where guns and ramming can finish the job. The psychological component of this sustained attack doctrine cannot be overstated. Imagine you're Werner Hartmann, 130 meters below the surface, listening to Asdic pings accelerating in frequency. You know from training and experience that each ping represents roughly 5 to 10 seconds of the escort's searching. When the pings reach a frequency of 1 every 5 seconds, the escort is very close, probably within 500 meters. When they stop, you have perhaps 60 to 90 seconds before the first charges detonate. 60 to 90 seconds. In that time, your mind runs through calculations that have become almost automatic through repetition. The destroyer lost contact at roughly 300 meters range. It's traveling at 15 knots, which is roughly 25 feet per second or 7.5 meters per second. In 60 seconds, it travels 450 meters. The charges drop from the stern as it passes overhead, meaning they enter the water when the destroyer is approximately 100 meters past your position. They sink at 5 meters per second. At your depth of 130 meters, that's 26 seconds, sink time, plus the 30-second travel time from loss of contact to when the destroyer reaches position overhead equals 56 seconds total. 56 seconds from the moment the pings stop until the first explosion. You count them. Everyone in the control room counts them, silently or aloud. 20, 30, 40, 50. And then the hammer falls. But here's what makes this experience uniquely terrifying compared to other forms of combat. In aerial combat, the engagement happens fast. You see the enemy fighter, you maneuver, someone shoots, someone dies or survives, and it's over in fighter seconds. In tank combat, battles are fluid. You're moving, the enemy's moving, visibility is limited, and adrenaline compresses time. Even in surface naval combat, the action is kinetic. Shells are flying, ships are maneuvering, there's smoke and noise and things happening. A depth charge attack is the opposite. You're stationary, or nearly so, moving at creeping speed. You can't see the enemy. You can see almost nothing except the dim red emergency lighting in your control room and the faces of your crew. The attack unfolds slowly enough that you experience every moment in excruciating detail. You hear the destroyer's propellers getting louder. You hear the Asdic pings accelerating. You hear them stop. You count seconds. You hear charges entering the water. You count more seconds. You hear the explosions. And then you wait to see if you're still alive, if the hull held, if the leaks are manageable, if you can survive the next pattern that you know is coming. This is psychological and warfare conducted through physics. The Allies don't advertise it as such, but the cumulative effect of thousands of depth charge attacks is to break the morale of U-boat crews. By mid-1943, U-boat crew casualty rates reach 75%. 3 out of 4 men who serve on U-boats will die at sea. The remaining survivors often suffer what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares about crushing pressure, inability to tolerate confined spaces, panic attacks triggered by loud noises. The sound of Asdic pings haunts them decades after the war ends. The German Navy attempts to develop countermeasures against Asdic, but nothing proves truly effective. One tactic is releasing Pillenwerfer, chemical canisters that dissolve in water and create clouds of bubbles. The bubbles reflect Asdic pulses, creating a false contact while the submarine attempts to slip away. This works occasionally against inexperienced operators early in the war, but by 1943, veteran Asdic operators learned to distinguish between the echo signature of bubbles and the solid return from a steel hull. Bubbles create a diffuse, fluctuating echo. Steel creates a sharp, consistent return. Another tactic is diving beneath thermal layers, areas where water temperature changes rapidly with depth. These layers refract sound waves, bending them away from the submarine and making detection more difficult. German U-boats carry bathythermographs, simple devices that measure water temperature at different depths to locate these layers. But thermal layers are unreliable. They form and dissipate based on weather, season, and location. Sometimes you find a good layer, sometimes you don't. And even when you do find one, diving beneath it puts you deeper, closer to your crush depth, with less margin for error if you need to dive to evade charges. The most effective German counter-tactic is actually the simplest: stay on the surface. Asdic cannot detect a surfaced submarine. If you remain on the surface and attack at night when visual detection is difficult, you avoid Asdic entirely. This works well in 1940 and 1941, during the happy time, when U-boats are sinking merchant ships at unsustainable rates. But by 1942, the Allies deploy centimetric radar that can detect surfaced submarines in darkness and poor visibility. Aircraft equipped with radar patrol convoy routes continuously. Surface attacks become suicidal. U-boats are forced to operate submerged during attacks, which puts them directly in the engagement envelope where Asdic and depth charges are most effective. By early 1943, the tactical situation for U-boats has deteriorated to the point where Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, faces an impossible choice. He can continue operations despite mounting losses, hoping to sink enough Allied merchant ships to justify the casualties. Or he can withdraw U-boats from the North Atlantic convoy routes and concede temporary defeat while attempting to develop new technologies that might restore the balance. The statistics force his decision. In May 1943, Black May, as it becomes known in the Kriegsmarine, Dönitz loses 43 U-boats in 31 days. 43 boats, over 2,000 men dead or captured. That's nearly a quarter of his operational fleet wiped out in a single month. Meanwhile, Allied merchant ship losses dropped to 50 ships for the entire month, compared to 97 ships lost in March alone. The exchange ratio has inverted completely. U-boats are being destroyed faster than shipyards can build them. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz issues the order his commanders have dreaded. All U-boats withdraw from North Atlantic convoy routes effective immediately. The official reason is temporary redeployment for equipment upgrades. The real reason is survival. Continuing current operations at current loss rates means losing the entire U-boat fleet within 3 months. The withdrawal doesn't mean the Battle of the Atlantic is over. U-boats continue operating in other areas, testing new tactics, deploying new technologies like the snorkel breathing tube that allows diesel engine operation while submerged. But the golden age of the U-boat, the period when German submarines dominated the Atlantic and came close to strangling Britain's supply lines, ends in May 1943. And a significant factor in that defeat is the combination of Asdic detection and depth charges delivered with increasing accuracy and persistence. The personal stories of individual U-boat commanders illustrate this transformation from hunters to hunted. Take Kapitänleutnant Otto Kretschmer, one of Germany's top aces with 35 ships sunk totaling over 200,000 tons. In March 1941, he's caught on the surface at night by the British destroyer HMS Walker. Asdic isn't involved because Kretschmer is surfaced, but he's forced to dive by radar detection and gunfire. Once submerged, Walker's Asdic locks onto his boat immediately. The subsequent depth charge attack damages U-99 so severely that Kretschmer is forced to surface and surrender. 43 of his crew survive. He spends the rest of the war in a British POW camp, or consider Korvettenkapitän Peter Gerlach on U-433. In April 1943, he's stalking convoy HX-233, positioning for a night surface attack. This tactic has worked beautifully for 2 years, but when he surfaces 8 miles from the convoy's outer screen, a destroyer turns toward him immediately. Not searching, not patrolling, turning directly toward his position like it received a telephone call. The destroyer detected U-433, while still submerged, still approaching, tracked the submarine continuously using long-range Asdic, and was already positioned for interception before the U-boat broke surface. Gerlach crash dives immediately, abandoning the attack. In his war diary entry that night, recovered from German naval archives after the war, he writes, "Enemy appears to possess detection apparatus of extraordinary range and accuracy. Recommend urgent investigation by technical command." But there's nothing to investigate. The technology exists. The Allies have it. The Germans don't. And the gap is widening. The experience of being depth-charged becomes a shared trauma that binds U-boat crews together while simultaneously breaking them individually. Veterans describe recurring nightmares decades after the war: the sound of Asdic pings, the counting of seconds, the explosions, the waiting to see if the next pattern will be the one that cracks the hull and floods the boat. Some survivors refuse to discuss their experiences entirely. Others talk compulsively, trying to process terror that never fully fades. One survivor, speaking to researchers in the 1980s, describes the worst moment not as the explosions themselves, but the silence between patterns. You knew another attack was coming. You could hear the destroyer's propellers circling above, but you didn't know when. You stood there in the red light, water dripping from broken pipes, men's faces white with fear, and you waited. Sometimes the wait was worse than the explosions, because your mind had time to imagine what would happen if the next pattern hit directly. The hull collapsing, water exploding inward, the boat diving past crushed depth while you scrambled to reach the forward hatch that you knew would never open because the water pressure was too great. Those images played in your mind during the silence. When the next pattern finally detonated, almost it was relief, because at least the waiting was over. The technical evolution of depth charges accelerates as the war progresses. Early charges contain 200 kilograms of TNT. Later models use Torpex, 50% more powerful. Sinking rates improve from 6 feet per second to 22 feet per second, as designers add streamlining and ballast. Fusing becomes more sophisticated, allowing settings up to 600 or even 1,000 feet depth to reach deep-diving U-boats. Some late-war charges incorporate magnetic fuses that detonate when they detect the steel hull of a submarine, eliminating depth-setting errors entirely. But perhaps the most significant development isn't in the charges themselves, but in delivery systems. Traditional stern-dropped charges have an inherent weakness. The escort must pass over the submarine's position before releasing charges, which means losing Asdic contact during the final approach. The submarine commander knows that once the Asdic pings stop, he has perhaps 60 to 90 seconds before charges arrive. That's enough time for evasive maneuvers that might move the submarine 50 or 70 meters from where the escort thinks it is. Forward-throwing weapons eliminate this problem. The British develop Hedgehog, a spigot mortar that fires 24 small projectiles in an elliptical pattern ahead of the attacking ship. Each projectile contains 35 pounds of explosive, with a contact fuse that detonates only on impact with a solid object. If Hedgehog projectiles hit the submarine's hull, they explode. If they miss, they sink harmlessly without detonating, which tells the attacking crew they need to try again rather than wondering if the explosions they heard meant a kill. Later, the British introduce Squid, a 3-barreled mortar that fires large depth charges ahead of the ship. Squid is tied directly into the Type 147 Asdic system, which calculates target depth, bearing, and range automatically, then fires the charges at the precise moment for optimal detonation geometry. Squid achieves kill rates approaching 40% per attack, compared to 6% for conventional depth charges. These weapons transform the tactical equation one final time. Now, the U-boat commander listens to Asdic pings accelerating in frequency, and instead of the pings stopping as the destroyer passes overhead, they continue right up until the moment weapons are fired. There's no blind time, no opportunity for last-second evasion. The pings track you until projectiles are in the air, and by then it's too late to move. This makes the psychological experience even worse, because the warning period extends until the moment of impact. You hear the pings. You know the attack is coming, and you can do absolutely nothing about it. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, Check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.